Okay, switching over here and let's get started. So you guys know that we did in fact release 11.21. So grab the update, no problem. Remember that when you install Digital Performer, that anything in your applications that's called Digital Performer gets replaced. That would be even DP10. So, you know, a lot of us will keep extra versions of DP around just in case, especially if you're in the middle of a project or a film score. You can rename the app, you know, prior to installing the next version. So I'm kind of keen on that. Although right now it's funny, I've decided to clean house a little bit. So I've gotten rid of all the other versions of 11. But feel free to keep, you know, 11.2 or obviously 11.11 and so on and so forth. Just rename the apps so that when the new install will just be called generically Digital Performer. So let's just look for a minute because it'll give us an opportunity to go into the Waveform Editor. So here's just a base part, and you can see we've got some various chunks we're going to get into, and we'll get into the topic here in just a minute. So let's go over here into the Sequence Editor. So you recorded something live. Geez, you know, DP has done some analysis work here on the beats, and it's done more than I wanted. So obviously there's a couple things I could do right off the bat. I could go into beats and just say, hey, let's just reanalyze the beats. You know, I want to recalculate, have it sort of think about a threshold and modify that. I'm going to cancel that. We'll just leave it as it is. So you decided you wanted to actually take these downbeats of these bass notes and create something out of them for beats. Let's just say, you know, hits, something simple like that. But I wanted to show you. So remember in here, you can obviously right click and go down into Open in Waveform Editor like this. Or remember, just Command double click. Command double click opens up in the Waveform Editor. And so you can see usually it opens up, you know, the first thing we see is the audio. Remember in here, you can come up here to audio, and remember you can actually do things like being able to apply various types of effects in here. You can come in here, you can do some various surgery and things with digital audio. Let's switch at the bottom over into, we have pitch, right? And let's look at beats. So with beats, you know, we can see the beat handles, and we can zoom in here with the normal, you know, command arrow keys. And so if I was going to clean this up a little bit, and I'm looking at the audio waveform, you can see that, remember, one of the tricks is we can see the downbeats, just the M. M is mute, just like you would for a soundbite. So I'm just going to come in here and say, well, I don't need this. I just want those downbeats. So we're just going to quickly go through here. Let's just say this is an important moment. You're working with a band, you're working on a score, and you just need this to be kind of perfect. You don't want to guess. And it doesn't take long. We're just going to get, so there's a downbeat. That is a downbeat I want to keep. Mute, mute. All I'm doing is clicking, guys, clicking on those lines. I'm not worried about the handles or the velocities. I want these downbeats. There's a pickup. I want that muted and this muted. And there's a couple more over here, and we'll wrap up. We won't go that much farther. So I think that's good. That's good. So we've gone through here manually in beats, and we're using the mute tool to click and mute those beats. So if we exit the waveform editor, we look back here. Oh, it's perfect. It's clean. So now that it's cleaned up, by the way, as a side note, if you're doing something, you know, critical with any quantization, remember, whenever you quantize audio in DP, it's all about the beats and the transients that it's found. And so remember, people sometimes will just try to quantize something and say, it doesn't work, it's broken, I can't figure this out. You get frustrated. Well, you know, sometimes it does a miraculous job calculating those beats. But sometimes, you know, it's interesting, bass guitar is funny that way because just based on the note itself, the attack, the vibrato, there's just certain things that happen with fingers that it gets false triggers. It makes it difficult. I wish it was easier with bass sometimes. And maybe there's things that we could do on our end with the algorithm. But for now, go into the waveform editor, look at the beats, fix those beats, mute things you don't need. So now all I have to do, of course, is go up to edit, and we're going to copy audio to MIDI. And you guys know we've just recently gone over things like Melodyne, Pure DSP. Let's stick with beats. And now I want to create a new instrument track. I hit OK, boom, done. So now you can see I've got perfect beats that do apply to the beats that I edited with the bass. So that's cool, right? So before, what happened is that even if you had done some surgery and done some work with the cleanup of the beats, what was spit out with this algorithm was just the original. So that's something they fixed and added. So, you know, it's really more of a fix than it is an addition. But, you know, it's in there, take advantage of it. And then it was an opportunity for us to go back in here and show you guys how to clean up. Now, don't forget one thing here. We can leave this MIDI bass in here and save. Remember at the top, and we do this all the time, we have our edit grid, but we have our beat grid. If I turn on the beat grid, take my scissor tool, cut. So let's cut here. And so it just makes your life so easy. If you're anywhere near the ballpark of that and you cut, you've got a perfect cut. So this is great. So you decided later on, you know, this note right here, I need to move this to a different part of the song and so on and so forth, but I've got a cut that's right at the zero crossing. So it makes it really handy. You've got an edit grid, you've got your beat grid, and you've got your marker grid. So I always like to use those a lot. It's a very, very handy feature in DP. Let's continue on our way. That was just something we did here in the 11.2.1 update. Let's get into today's topic. So today I want to talk about, it's funny, the One Finger Orchestra. I thought that was kind of funny. That's something that Dennis McCarthy kind of coined, that phrase, in the sense that, you buy a lot of virtual instruments today that, you play one note. And he was kind of, in a way grumping about how, composers will buy something and they'll play one note and it sounds like a symphony because it's just all this complexity. And I thought that's kind of cool though, because obviously it's all in the hands of the composer, right? Sometimes it's sort of like cheating. You play a note and it kind of does all this work. And then, obviously what you build around it, how you use it, how you orchestrate with it and so on and so forth. And then I thought, well, what if we could kind of take that approach with just what's built in? Again, you'll buy instruments that have that sort of functionality, that complexity, and some don't. So how would we actually add that to things that don't inherently have syncopation and complexity and rhythm and harmony and stuff like that? So let's do that. Let's get into it. So let's just go over here to the first chunk, which is Simple Touch. That's the name of this here. And here's something kind of cool. And you guys know about this for those of you who use Universal Audio stuff. Universal Audio has native plugins, right? They're rolling out Spark, which is the stuff that runs off of the native processor. So they have obviously their plugins and virtual instruments, which is cool. So they're moving in the world of native. And so I still have some of their DSP and I like their plugins a lot, but it's great to make use of the native processing. So here's one of their synths. Now, what we're going to talk about in this, let me just play the synth here for a second. It's just kind of a cool driving kind of ARP-ish synth. Now, one thing I wanted to mention, when you're starting to add layers and you're starting to sequence with Digital Performer, it's something we've covered, but I just want to take just a minute to remind you guys that when you go up to Setup and you actually go into Input Filter, Input filter is global, right? Every device in your system, all your MIDI devices that show up, whether USB or hardware devices that connect to MIDI interfaces, if I turn on velocities, if I turn it off, it's no longer touch sensitive. So no matter how loud I play this note, it's going to come in at 64. So maybe you want that. Maybe you're doing snare parts. Maybe you're just having somebody play in notes and you don't want velocity. You just want a fixed velocity of 64, and you can have that in DP. Again, globally for all your devices, you can just turn off touch sensitivity very simply by going back to Input Filter. Of course, I want touch sensitivity, so I'll turn it back on velocities, and I'll play it really quietly. I'll lay into it. So it's nice to be able to have touch sensitivity, but just wanted to remind you that that's where you would get to that. Let's just look at the mixing board for just a second for this particular one. So you can see, of course, with the combined instrument track, that's what I have here today. We've got the UA plugin here, the synth. And of course, we have our audio inserts at the top. We have our MIDI inserts at the bottom. So right off the bat, super simple. We've got this ARP, and it's stock. It's great. It's cool. Can I give it some variety? How can I immediately give it some variety? Well, if I go into the ARP plugin, you'll see me in the ARP plugin a lot today, but right off the bat, I'm just going to give it a plus octave. So if I play it, it's just going to plus octave. Now I've got it set to eighths. Listen. So, it's just super simple. I got down, up. I can go up, down. And it's interesting, in the case of this being 16th note in its pattern, nothing really happens when it's 16th because it's sort of fighting itself, right? So you kind of have to think about the subdivision of the actual ARP. And by the way, don't forget that down below, you can always hold the note sort of as you're working on it for a second. So let me just save. I'll play the note, it will hold. So now I'm thinking, well, let's go to 2 octaves. I want to change the pattern, down, up. I want to not repeat the top note. So we can unhold. Again, like the world's simplest example, but you've got something in one of your virtual instruments, it's doing something that's repeating. It's, you can't really go into this necessarily and modify it. You might be able to go into the parameters themselves, try a different preset. Maybe there is a step sequencer. Hard to say to what extent you can edit it. In some synths you have full editing, and some you have zero editing. It's just almost more of like a rompler. It's playing back a sample and it's got an ARP on it. But it's just a simple way to add a little bit more expression and complexity is to simply add some kind of a division, pick a melodic pattern, pick a subdivision and pick an octave. And now it's just a very simple way. So we'll just move past this. I just want to use this example for touch sensitivity and the most basic way to modify the patch. So let's continue on our way we'll go over here to something a little bit more complex, which is device groups. You know, we've been in device groups a lot lately. You know, Glenn went into it in the last couple webinars. We've talked about it, but I want to use it now in the context of creating something that's kind of more one finger oriented. So we have the Opal, again here, this Opal morphing synth, the one from Universal Audio, the native synth. And we also have one of their Moog, mini Moog synths as well, which is cool. They've got some, you can see the UI is nice and big here. You can see it on my monitor. I've got it set so the resolution isn't such that you guys can see my screen a little bit better. I don't have it set to the full resolution, but I'm kind of used to it now with my eyes. And yeah, I lose a little bit of screen real estate, but at the same time, it's just easy. I can see things the right way. And especially when I'm doing Zooms and stuff with clients or people, it's just everybody can see, and it's much easier to participate when you're not squinting. So what do we have here in folder 1? We've got the synth, a couple different synths. Now, of course, I can arm these synths, and we're going to get into MultiRecord, right, where I can go up to Studio, and if I put this into MultiRecord, I can specify, you know, the input device, and we'll break this down a little bit more, and I can arm and play both synths at the same time, okay? Both at the same time. Now, let me take it out of MultiRecord for a second. And now here's something interesting. I decided, well, I want to create one MIDI track and I want to create a device group to trigger both of these synths at the same time. So you guys remember, if we go up to Studio and we go down in here into the MIDI Device Groups, you can see it'll open up here in my sidebar. I've got it just generically named Device Group 1. And what do we do with device groups? Whenever you add this window, remember you can just choose New Device. And whenever you choose a new device, you get to choose what output you're going to select. So in other words, it's a MIDI device that you're going to trigger. It could be an external hardware device. It could be a virtual instrument. So in this case, this device group 1 up here, device group 1, it's triggering MIDI channel 1. You can see channel 1 of Opal and it's channel 1 of the Moog. So if I put this into record, now here's something interesting. I mean, it's kind of generic, right? If I go over to the mixing board, here's what I want to do. In fact, let me show here the track selector. Now, what I've done is when I go into the ARP, yeah, we can do what we kind of just did in the last chunk, but you'll see up here, there's an interesting option. We can cycle through the device group assignments. So as it's arpeggiating, as you're playing the MIDI, every syncopated value is going to actually move through the cycle of what your device group is made of. So that's kind of interesting. I've got a bass and I've got this synth, and they're going to basically be interchangeable. They're going to be playing off of each other, cycling through these various things. So what I ended up doing is, let me unbypass this for a second. We'll play it. And here's what it sounds like. So you hear it cycling through, and I've got it set to down, and I've got it set to obviously just an eighth note. But what I've also wanted to do here was add even more rhythm to it. So this is where, again, you'll see today one of the tricks that you can do, aside from using the ARP plugin to create some motion and complexity, is the pattern gate. Of course, the mighty pattern gate becomes, you know, seriously one of my favorite plugins that comes with Digital Performer, because it's just so useful on anything that sustains in your mix, right? Some ripping guitar part, and you're just putting even the most subtle amount of pattern gate on there, and all of a sudden, what is that? How did you rhythmize a sustained guitar part? Pattern gate. Pattern gate is just one of the coolest plugins, and it takes up absolutely no processing power. You could run 1,000 of these on different tracks and combinations. You could put it on your whole mix. Let's say you're doing this really cool electronic song, and everything's very legato and sustained, and it's this ghosty track, and then you automate the pattern gate, and all of a sudden the whole track is pumping in this really interesting rhythm that you've created, and then it comes out of it. And people, how would you automate that? Well, pattern gate. Pattern gate is, I should have built that, right? But you guys can see that that's something we can do. So I'm just going to basically build some rhythm into the bass. Super simple. I mean, literally 16ths. So I can hear it cycle through. Well, what does it sound like? Well, let's just try it. Let me make it a little bit more aggressive. Let's try a different note here. And let's just try some different. Let's try a 1 octave. So we can try different rhythms. Let's try a different sort of melodic pattern. We'll change the mix. Let's try a chord. So if we try a chord, as we keep adding notes, So again, we've got this rhythmic complexity. We're actually animating this a little bit. And all we had to do was basically use a device group so that we could trigger both any of the synths that were assigned in the device group, and yet we're cycling through these various synths that are in the device group. So you have to kind of play with it a little bit. And I'm, still sort of thinking about what I would want to do with that. But maybe there's a situation where, think about it from an orchestral standpoint even. Let's say piano harp, right? And you're doing some interesting arpeggiated pattern, create a device group, and now you're cycling through, it's kind of going back and forth through the harp and the piano, and it's cycling through, and you're creating these different rhythmic patterns. And then of course we can add the pattern gate as well. So there's another example here that I wanted to show you guys. Let's go back over here to the window. Let's open up number 2. This is stylus. Okay, so what are we doing with stylus? Stylus is a device group. So what are we doing with it? Well, look, my device group in stylus is made up of 4 MIDI channels. So let me just open this up here real quick so you guys can see. So channel 1 is a hi-hat, 2 tambourine, metals and woods, and triangle, all on different MIDI channels, all made up built into a device group. So when I trigger this MIDI track, all 4 channels get triggered. What does it sound like? So I'm playing all 4 sounds at once. It's an interesting layer. Maybe you would want that just by itself. I just want to stack. I just want to layer. But if we go over here to the mixing board, and if I do now use the ARP, and I use the cycle through device group assignments, I can now listen to when I play one note, one finger, right? So that's something that, I did very quickly, and yet to sort of play that, it would take a little bit of thinking, like, well, how am I going to actually get this thing to sort of, do that? It's going to cycle through, and there are going to be 4 different devices that are being triggered with different sounds. And now I can change the octave. So I think, okay, that's +2, which is kind of cool. I like that. Here's another. See how the plus octave gives you some more vibe? Let's go to +2. What if we change? Wait, let's think about the pattern. That's kind of interesting. Let's hear +3. Let's change that's a little bit, it's interesting depending on what's mapped, right? We don't know what's mapped in every instrument. Let's speed it up. Kind of interesting. Let's try a different shape. A little fast. Maybe we would how about we just do triplet here? So let's do that. So let's see 3. Oh, I guess we're in triplet. So let's not do triplet. Let's do just regular 8. So you get the idea. It's a simple thing, right? Just a simple thing. Multiple MIDI tracks happening here with a device group, and now we're cycling through and we're thinking about, how is it behaving in terms of the pattern? What's the rhythmic value? Are we adding an octave to it? By the way, the duration doesn't always come into play. It's interesting. Like sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, depending on the nature of the sound. You could experiment with it. I haven't really found, for what I'm doing, it's really come into play. That where I would want to be able to change the duration of those notes. But in some cases with certain synths, you might really hear a noticeable difference. But there again, like to be able to play this the way that we did it, without using this particular ARP would be a little bit more challenging and time consuming. And this is the kind of thing where you just might file it away in that sort of creative moment. I want to be able to cycle through and think about in a case where, let's say something odd, like where they're different harp sounds or different synth sounds. Let's say you're doing something, Christmassy, right? And you have these bell sounds, these glockenspiels and things like that. And you've got 4 different ones and they have all different sort of sparkles to them. And now you're playing and arping those and it's cycling through and it's like, it's got this interesting shimmer to it and you've created this whole new sound. And so again, it's always about just kind of being creative, trying things. I'm kind of really into that. I enjoy that part of this whole universe is just exploring sounds and just trying things and trying to sort of, break rules. And it's simple stuff really, but again, just trying to keep the creative juices flowing and share that with you guys. Let's move on to some kind of heavier stuff here. So that's all really basic stuff. Let's go over now into simple strings. So this is a super, super generic sound here in Contact. In fact, here's what it sounds like. It's the most generic string sound we all have, right? Let me just open up Contact so you guys can see that I'm not in the library view because this Kirk Hunter library doesn't have a library tab view. It just has a files view, which you guys know it's like kind of looking through a directory. And you can set up, our friend Chris Peck, who comes on and helps us and does presentations for us, talked about things like creating quick loads to be able to load your non-library view instruments in. So this is just a whole sort of big, lushy kind of string sound, very simple. So what are we going to do with it? We're just going to create a little bit of motion, right? So you've been kind of assigned to score something really simple, and they're not saying it has to be totally orchestral. There's a little bit of leeway there. So you're thinking, well, what can I do with this? Like, how can I give it a little bit more life? All right, well, let's just go into the mixing board here. Let's start off with something really simple, which is, we all love Soundtoys plugins. I'm a big fan. It's interesting. As I'm kind of looking through sounds and I'm building a presentation, I always think, well, there's a lot of great companies like Universal Audio and SSL and Waves. And a lot of those companies make your more sort of generic compressor, EQ, limiter type combinations. And Soundtoys is all the creative, interesting stuff. I mean, they do make drive plugins and distortion plugins, things like that. But they're really creative. So if you're somebody who's a guitar player or somebody who's always looking for like odd effects, you're working with singers and bands that are doing like non-traditional stuff or electronic music or just interesting stuff, like Soundtoys is a must. It's kind of one of those, like, no one does what they do. I'm kind of bragging on those guys, but they're really good. So this is the version 5 plugins. And of course, Filter Freak, let's just unbypass it here. And if I play a chord, you can see the mix level right now is pretty dry. We can add it in a little bit here. So we can add a little. So you can see, right off the bat, obviously we're really starting to change the sound. It's going to sound a little bit more synthy. It's going to have a little bit more, it's going to sound a little bit different. And, that's a way you can see there's motion in that. It's got a little bit of that filter motion to it. But now, of course, let's take that layer and let's put something really subtle like pattern gate in there. Now, remember with pattern gate, it's all about the depth, right? The depth is if it's super slammy and just versus super subtle. Let's start with really subtle. I'm just going to play that little suspension thing here. Let's just hear that. So already you're kind of like thinking, okay, now I've got this sort of bed where it's got this motion. Now, if I play that, if I didn't have this pattern gate and I was playing dot, 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 I was playing that sort of rhythmic pattern, it wouldn't sound like that. It wouldn't have that sort of gluey kind of feel to it. So this is the depth, right? I can make it really subtle. Make it really aggressive. It's too aggressive. Now, here's something interesting, and we've done this before. I can modulate the depth. So what does that mean? We can take something here, a modulator like a sawtooth or a sine wave, as the shape of the actual modulation. And we could say, hey, let's do a depth of 50. So what does that mean? At 50, you'll hear it. It's best to just play it and listen to it. It's not in all the time. It sort of comes and goes. It's kind of a 50% sort of modulation of the actual depth. So if I play that same figure, listen. Gluey in. So maybe we'd want a little bit of motion where it's not in, not out, and so on and so forth. So again, very, very basic stuff, but again, trying to think outside of the box, trying to break the mold, take a traditional string sound that sounds nice and warm. And I added one more thing I want you guys to see. I take off the depth here in terms of the modulation. Now, here's a Waves plugin called Kaleidoscope, which is cool. It's a phaser-ish kind of vibe to it. It's just going to make it really wide sounding. And we'll leave this in here. Let's just see here. So it's really basic. But we've got some motion, we've got some filter, we've got sort of a phaser. Of course, the pattern gate is always adding. We can easily change the rhythm. And so don't forget, one of the interesting things you can do in the pattern gate is, set it to something odd. You're in 4/4 time and you're going to say, hey, every 7 beats, I want you to flip around. And now you're going to get some sort of over the bar kind of things happening. And it's just sort of like, it's every so often, it's, you can set this border and say, hey, it's going to repeat every 7 beats, even though I'm in 4, and it's going to create some interesting rhythms. So again, very basic stuff as we kind of get into more of the advanced stuff that we're going to get into. I kind of want to lay the groundwork for that. Let's go over it and talk about multi-record a little bit more elaborately.
Hey, I did note in the chat though, the cycle through device groups, device assignments, it exists both in not only just the arpeggiator, but also the Echo plugin. Mm-hmm. So if you had a device group that had 4 distinct sounds and you played a note, you might hear the first note as a piano and the first echo as a trumpet and the second echo as a flute and the third one as a bell. So it'd go bing, dong, 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 bing, dong, 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 dong. So it would echo with completely different sounds.
Excellent. That's a very good tip. We're going to get into multi-record a little bit more, everybody. I know it's a simple concept, but this will kind of illustrate it. We have, obviously, you can see right now, whenever it says any, whenever a MIDI input says any, that obviously means that we are set to, any device in your studio, right? So this, by the way, just as a reminder, if you have 5 or 6 different keyboards plugged in and someone's going to play the upper part and you kind of worked out something that's kind of forehand, right? You're going to play it at the same time. You can do that. Right? You could do that. Maybe you would want to record those on separate MIDI tracks, but you certainly could have multiple people playing this different keyboards at the same time, and you could put it in any, and all your devices are taking the input. So that works really well. But let's get into multi-record. So when I go up to Studio and I go down into multi-record, now I have to specify. In fact, I have to specify. If I don't specify and it just shows up with IAC driver or something, I'm not going to get MIDI input. So remember now in the list, and you want to come down here and say, oh, I want to choose this device. By the way, quick little thing I want to interrupt with, which is something super simple for those who are on a Mac. In your audio MIDI setup, this is this M32, which is the complete control. And in here, by the way, it was actually at one point named complete control in caps. So let me just actually show you guys sort of what happens here when you have very, very long device names. Things, and I'm very sort of type A about, I don't like long device names. I'm very, I want to see everything very clearly in the tracks window, and I don't want something eating up a whole column. So remember, you might think, well, is there a danger in renaming these devices? There isn't. There really, even the ones, you might think, well, I can rename the ones that are connected to my MOTU MIDI interface or my MOTU audio interface that has MIDI ports. No. You can rename the devices here as well. So we can just get rid of the M's here and we can just go back. And what's great, by the way, is we'll apply and it'll just happen on the fly, which is good. So we can quit AMS, back to a nice short abbreviated name. So I'm in multi-record, so I'm actually good to go. I can record enable this. And of course, I can record on multiple MIDI tracks at the same time. Multiple MIDI tracks at the same time. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about audio for a second. Now, you guys know, well, let's just, as a reminder, the preference in DP is that multi-record is always turned on for audio. So even if I'm not in multi-record for MIDI, I'm always in multi-record for audio. So if you can see here, if let's say you have a couple different inputs going into audio tracks and you're going to record, bass player, guitar player at the same time, a couple vocals, a couple singers at the same time, and so on and so forth. Now, we can, by the way, go up here to preferences under audio options. And let's do that. You'll see up here where it says multi-record is always on for audio tracks. If I disable this, okay, so now you can see we're in multi-record, we're in multi-record globally, right? So when I'm in multi-record, MIDI is in multi-record and audio is in multi-record. But if I take that out, let's take this out, I can only record one audio track at a time and one MIDI track at a time. So if you think about it, maybe you're in a situation where you're singing and you just don't want to run the risk. Like let's say you have multiple audio tracks and you just have a lot going on and you really don't want the behavior where you can record on multiple audio tracks at the same time. You know, it's just you singing for the rest of the afternoon or whatever. And you just, if you wanted to not have to think about that, because you have, again, you're using multiple mics and you just might run the risk of recording or something like that, turn that off. Turn that off. So all you had to do is go into preferences, audio options, and you can say, well, no, I want multi-record. But if we keep it in its default state, by the way, that's the way it is currently set up. Regardless of the MIDI, you know, the MIDI, the audio is always set where you can record at the same time. So I just want to make sure you guys are aware of that. You can disable that behavior if you're recording audio and you want one at a time, period. Let's talk just for a minute. This is just a side note, but it is kind of important because it does come up on occasion where people will ask me, how do I print effects in audio at the time of singing it? So I thought, well, here's an example. This will illustrate a situation where here's what we're going to do. This SM81, that's the microphone I'm speaking into right now. That's what we're hearing in Zoom, sitting in front of me on my desk. So remember, I have an aux track here set up. And remember, aux tracks can be fed from buses, but aux tracks can be fed from hardware inputs. So my microphone into my MOTU 1248 interface is coming directly into the aux track. Now, I deliberately didn't name my buses because I want you guys to really see the routing here. I was going to name it path 1 and path 2. And I thought, no, don't name the, you know, obviously under bundles, Shift U, you can rename all of your buses, and many of us do this all the time. We're trying to be very organized about our buses. So I've left it bus 9 and bus 10. You see it's mono because my voice is coming in on a single channel. So there's no reason to use a stereo bus. In fact, as a general rule, and I would suggest, you know, recording your voice on a mono track, unless for whatever reason you've got a stereo reverb or something that you're capturing outside of the box that needs to come in stereo. It's just easier to deal with when it comes to pitch correction, when it comes to time stretching, when it comes to just a single mono track. You know, it's an interesting question. You know, sometimes with virtual instruments, you know, you have a bass drum and people will print the bass drum as a stem. Should the stem be mono? Should the stem be stereo? You know, sometimes most people deliver stereo just because that's what they're going to get in a bounce. But you know, those are some interesting questions. It doesn't really have to be stereo. It could be mono. But let's just stick to the focused here. We've got the input coming into an aux track. Now, it's going to a bus immediately. So immediately it's going over here into this track. If I arm this track, you can see I've got the diamond drive distortion. So let's look now in the mixing board here. Let's look at the mixing board. So here's my aux track. And again, I'm not set to monitor it yet because I don't have these tracks in record. Now look at this. If I put this track into record, this track comes in and I've got a send going to bus 10. So this is recording the voice completely dry because this diamond drive, based on the insert pre and post fader yellow line. You see there's a yellow line. If I go over here to this one, I can click. Wherever I set this line and wherever I set my effects, the effects can either be pre or post insert, post fader. So you have inserts that are pre fader or post fader. So right now, it's because I've got the diamond drive set post fader. As my vocal comes into the aux track, I'm sending it over to bus 10 and it's coming in bone dry. Now, if I move this to pre, notice that now I'm sending this diamond drive effect into this channel because it's set to pre-fader. Let me set it back to post. If I put this into record, this is in fact getting the distortion. So if I arm both tracks and I hit record, testing 1, 2, testing, check, 1, 2. We go back over here, we take it out of record, and I've printed, here's the distortion track, testing 1, 2, testing. Here's the dry. Testing 1, 2. So, you know, why would you need to do this? Well, let's just say for the case of you're doing a band, you know, you're doing this cool rock, very heavy band, and the singer wants that sort of radio sound. They're going to do a whole section. We're working on a couple verses of this sort of telephonic kind of distorted sound. Now, obviously, you have to be very happy with it, right? Not that you couldn't EQ it or change it or compress it later, but you're printing it. You're committing this distortion at the time of the recording. And so Diamond Drive is one of my favorites too. It's really good on a lot of things, snares and kicks and things. Very cool sounding. It's not just distortion. It's just edge and drive and sort of tape sounding in a way. So just as a reminder, aux input sending to 2 buses. The channel's going to bus 9. the send is going to bus 10, and based on where I put the insert, either pre or post, I can record to 2 channels at the same time, one with and one without. So kind of, make sure that you understand that routing, because it may come up on a rare occasion where somebody wants to print, on a plugin. They've got this great guitar plugin or whatever it might be. Or here's something else that you might do with it, right? And this is my check-in to see if anyone's still here. Oh, good. Now this is great. Compression. Like, let's say you've got this really, really great sounding compressor. It just sounds amazing. And you're printing compression. And one's clean, one's without. And maybe you guys just live with, hey, the compressed stuff is awesome. It's good to go. We're done. I love the way that sounds. Most of us in the DAW sort of world, we never think about printing effects. We're always like, we'll fix it later. We'll print it later. We don't want to commit anything. But maybe you're this person who wants to do that on a rare occasion. You want to commit an effect. So I just wanted to make sure you guys understand the routing there. And that's something we think about. We often think about pre-post sends, but we also have pre-post inserts. And there's the line. And you can decide where you want to put the line. Click on the dot and drag it post, pre. Cool. So that's a quick little thing. We'll move on here to the next example. So we've got this. We can save this and keep it. And let's go over here into the one finger land. So we'll let this load here. It's a number of instruments. So it'll just take a moment to load, and we'll let it go here. Remember that with Digital Performer, that inactive chunks, they just take up a little bit of RAM or memory. They don't take up processing power. So that's something, as you think about film scoring, as you think about a live playback rig, right? If these were all taking up processing power, it would be pretty heavy. It'd be pretty heavy. I mean, I'm running a decently high buffer, 256, but it is taking a memory footprint, but it's not taking up a processing footprint. So what do we have in this example? Now we're going to start getting into more of the one finger thing. And so right now you can see that when it says any, that multi-record is turned off. So let's just audition some of these sounds. These are all sounds that we all know and use all the time, whether massive native instruments, Spectrasonics, Falcons, Spitfire, and so on and so forth, Isotope. It's a pretty wide gamut of different sounds here. I didn't realize they had 2 different isotopes in this. I like their synths. They're actually nice sounding. And Tyrell. So let's just break it down here. I'm going to go and let's just go into the mixing board and let's just look at some of the processing real quick, because I want you guys, again, to think about if I go into the pattern gate and I bypass this, the first sound that's in record, and we'll bypass this as well, is just this massive. So that's all that is. Just a cool sounding synth, right, by itself. That's massive. So right off the bat, for my one finger orchestra, I wanted rhythm. So I added this. Pattern gate. Right on the insert. Immediately add a pattern gate. Do I want to add a crystallizer from, Soundtoys? Look at here what it sounds like. See how it's kind of harmonizing it here? Fifths. Or it's sort of adding, I wouldn't say it's necessarily a pure fifth, but it's adding. Now look at over here, we have the mix level. So let's just say, just a little bit of that. So we're adding a little bit of complexity. We've got right off the bat, we've got rhythm. We're adding a little crystallizer, which is kind of harmonizing it. What are we doing with transpose? Well, let's take a look. In this transpose, I'm transposing it up a major third. All right, let's hear it. All right, cool. So we've transposed it. Now here's something interesting, right? Let me bypass this for a minute. I'm also harmonizing. Remember, with MIDI inserts, you can stack inserts, you can stack quantize, you can stack transpose. You could arpeggiate an arpeggiator if you wanted to. It'd be hard to say what it would do, if it would be musical or not. But look what I'm doing here. I'm harmonizing an octave. So here's unbypassed. Okay, that's the original. In fact, I should have had this bypassed at the beginning. Now I'm going to unbypass and I'm going to harmonize an octave. So pause for a second and think about this. You're playing a part on the piano. And let's say, for instance, it's this moment in the score where there's this octave piano thing. You're doing this cool Latin thing where you have this piano octave thing. And you think, well, I can really only play it right now kind of with one hand. I've got it under my right hand. I can't really do the octave thing in the way that I want. So I'm not going to do it justice. So, but I can play the single notes. Oh, well, no problem. I'll just simply add a transpose plugin and I'll just harmonize that input on the fly. Up or down an octave, or a fifth, or a major 7, or whatever makes sense. And then you're playing one note, and you've got the octave piano, and you're playing it. And then later on, you go, well, you know, I'm just going to undo that, or I'll double it now, or actually copy the notes. Because remember, this is a filter, right? So it's not going to look that way in QuickScribe until you actually change the notes. Now, of course, we can apply these effects as well. So, but let's stay tuned here. So we've done a couple of things on this little massive track, you know, between the pattern gate crystallizer, we've transposed up a major third. We've also harmonized an octave. So we've got some, it's cool. We're on our way to adding something interesting. So now what are we doing in Omnisphere? Nothing of interest. But Omnisphere is going to do a bass part for me. It's going to do this, which is great. So that's just going to be giving that sort of low root pedal kind of underneath thing that I want for this track. Again, remember, I'm thinking, I want to cheat here. I want to play one finger. I'm really lazy today. No. But again, it's an exercise in thinking about motion, thinking about kind of adding some complexity. So that's cool. Omnisphere is good to go. What's Falcon going to do? Looks like Falcon is also super easy, but all I've added in Falcon is simply patternized. So here we are getting into more Soundtoys stuff, I guess, and it's a filter freak, right? So this is going to add some motion. Let's hear what it sounds like. So it's just, you know, it's a standard loop essentially, but we're giving it a little bit of filter motion. It's just kind of, doesn't sound super generic. It's got a little bit of modification happening in here. Labs, right? What are we doing with labs? Well, let's just hear it generically by itself. Everyone, by the way, everyone has to get on the labs bandwagon. I'm sure we all know about this. This is free from Spitfire, and it's some of the greatest stuff. Honestly, I don't even know how they do this, but they're so good about that. Labs is a must-have. You got to have labs. And here's a frozen violin, I guess here, frozen strings. What does it sound like? So there's unaffected, this beautiful harmonic string. That's a film score in itself right there. I mean, there's a Marvel scene where somebody's dying here, unfortunately. So we're going to give it some pattern gate. You know, why not? I'm addicted to this plugin here. What does it sound like? Let's make it more subtle. When you think about it, right? I mean, that's totally interesting. You got this long held note. You've got rhythmizing this one held note, and you can make it so subtle. It's almost like, is it really moving? Let me make it really subtle. A little bit less subtle. I'm telling you, boy, the pattern gate can really breathe a lot of life. Megasynth. Now, what are we doing with Megasynth? Sub-octave. Okay, cool. There are some interesting presets right in here, right off the bat. What's it going to sound like? And maybe I would dial it back just a little bit. So we've got rhythm, and we're adding a sub-octave. It's interesting. I could have also used this transpose plugin. Remember how we talked about doing a harmonize with this? I could have done that with this. I could have harmonized that. Well, let's just stick with what it is for the time being. We'll quickly go through these others. Manipulator. This is an interesting this is the infected mushroom, folks. This is something that Bo Astrup turned me on to at one point. And this is cool. Again, this is something that's going to add, this is an octavus. What does it sound like without? Here's the original. Play it real quick. Just a beautiful synth and isotope. Listen to how nice that is. What is this doing to it? Adding a layer. It kind of reminds me of absinthe a little bit. It has that sort of absinthe kind of beautiful, lush quality to it. So that's a very subtle thing. It already has a lot of motion. And what's Tyrell doing? Let's hear it without the ARP. Super simple. What are we doing with the ARP? Well, we're just adding a little bit of little pulsation to it. Hey, why don't we harmonize it? Let's just do that. What if we drag this harmonizer over? That's up an octave. Why don't we go down an octave? Let's go C3. What does it sound like? Oh, why don't we make it an interval as opposed to an octave? Why don't we say, how about G3? Let's try it. What does the fifth sound like? I don't know if I want to commit to that necessarily, so we'll just basically get rid of this plugin. I can bypass it by option clicking on it. And last but not least, what is this doing here? So now all I have to do, I've kind of built this in advance, and this is the kind of thing where you might just think about, okay, well, I'm going to save this in a current state, or maybe what I could also save some of these as clippings. Remember that, when you have a channel strip of ideas, if I save at the very top the insert preset, it saves the audio, the instrument, the MIDI, plugins are all saved. That's actually really cool, by the way, about a combined instrument track. When you save a combined instrument track as an insert preset, it's the entire thing. It's everything. It's not the level and the pan, although, it'd just come up at Unity. But that's really handy. You spent all this time, and now you think, well, I'm just going to create a folder in here. Let's just hypothetically do this together. Hey, I like this. I think I could use this later. What am I going to do with it? Oh, well, we're just going to put this in here. We can put it in common. Either way, up above here. And we can look how it inherits the name of all those things that are associated with it. And I'm just going to call this ML Web just for the time being, just so we can find it. If I hit save, I've saved ML Web. So what does it look like? Well, we go down here and there it is. It's just loose. I could put it in a folder, but I can call it up any project, any new project, any old project, an existing project. So now let's take it out of record. We're going to go back to the tracks window. Let's go up to studio. We're going to put it into MultiRecord. All the M32s, that's my native instruments. I'm going to arm everybody. So when I play C3, they're all going to play. Now, what would be kind of interesting to do is, I know the Falcon is drums. So let's not have drums and bass at first. So I'm just playing one finger, and it's obviously animating. Everything is assigned. Everything's doing its work, whether pattern gate, ARPs, if it's got its own built-in motion. One quick point I want to mention here about Falcon. This is something that caught me off guard at first. If you look at the top, you'll see in Falcon, that's true of Workstation, you have to make sure that sync to host is turned on. I thought, oh, is that a bug? Why isn't Falcon behaving? Why is it not sticking with my tempo? Because remember, I need to point this out, kind of goes without saying that it's going to follow the tempo automatically. Everything I'm doing arpeggiated wise, all the filters, all the pattern gates are following the tempo. I have to make sure that sync to host is enabled for Falcon so that he's following along. We can put him in now. What does it sound like? Well, let's hear it. Very touch sensitive. Save. Well, it's thinking, let's pick it up a little bit, 120. Let's hear that a little bit faster. One finger. So now, of course, do I really need to do that? Again, it's all about a lesson, right? So now when I hit record and I start playing One Finger Orchestra, it's going to start playing in the timeline, all those single notes. Of course, what's nice about me recording those notes is I can edit the notes, right? I can edit the notes. Now, I should point out that I could have created one big bad MIDI device group. That's another way we could have done it. In fact, if we would have created the device group and had the MIDI track, we could have done the cycle technique. That would be pretty odd in this case where it's drums, bass. It would be very interesting. Who knows? Maybe it would be incredible. I mean, I have no idea what that would turn into. The drums, it might be sort of not so great. But in a way, though, it's so nice to be able to record this. Now, remember, in Digital Performer, if I hit record, I can be pulling things in and out of record on the fly. So if you really got this one finger thing dialed in and you thought, okay, what, I'm going to do a quote performance now. And I am going to start without Omnisphere and Falcon. And I'm going to record, and I'm going to drop things in. You could do that. Let me see something here. Let's do this. Go like this. Big pause. I don't know why I was waiting so long. And so I could be sort of thinking about a performance where I'm going to bring things in. I can pause. You know, what's interesting about doing the pauses, by the way, is that remember, there's a clock going underneath at all times. So you're never going to not be in sync. It's just a question of, are you going to be picking up? And sometimes with certain virtual instruments, you guys know that like it's thinking in phrases. It's a cycle. It's not going to always start when you hit the key from the beginning. It might be mid-cycle, depending on the way the programming was done, depending on the way you pick the preset. So you have to kind of think about that, but you do know that it's always going to be in time. The other thing that you could do is you could, in the conductor track, you could create a tempo map. So it starts at one tempo and then it speeds up and then you're recording things. So again, One Finger Orchestra, and you're building things in. Now I'm playing C, right? I haven't even thought about what would it sound like? We can undo my quote performance. I haven't even played more than one note. Now, of course, as you guys know, if I play something like, you know, an interval, it's going to could be madness, but let's just try it. Let me just take out the drums here just to make it less madness here. Let's just play, you know, basically fifths. Let me try it again. Remember, it's very touch sensitive, so I'll play it very quiet. Well, let me play it one more time here. I can do this. Go back to the beginning. I mean, you know, I'm telling you, if you kind of forget about all the technical part of it, you're just having fun. I've created something that there's no preset for. There's no way you could combine native instruments and spectrosonics and all these other interesting elements and just combine them in weird ways. And now you're creating. Now, is it usable? Who knows? I mean, that's subjective, right? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But again, you're kind of just having fun, trying different things. How about the drums on that last example? I'm curious. I just want to see what that would sound like. So let me try that little thing, the little flat 5 thing. It's interesting how, let me get it in sync. If I don't play it. Oh, the second's nice. I'll play a little louder. Down the octave. That's pretty interesting. Okay, so that's sort of synth land, right? We can take these guys out of record for a second and let's save. And of course, I'm going to take, by the way, the shortcut for MultiRecord is a hairy one, but my brain remembers it. Look in the corner of your Mac keyboard for a second. Command Control Shift M. It's like 9 fingers, hold your tongue out, and use your elbow. I love those.
Hey, Matt, somebody asked, what about combining what you're just doing in this particular chunk with the clips, How would that go? Is that workable?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, remember, clips is what's already data, right? So clips is only, I mean, it's not that it's interesting, right? I thought about that in a little way. I thought, well, see, clips are objects, you know, I should say objects, but they are themselves clips, but whether MIDI phrases or audio phrases, in the case of this, these are all combined instrument tracks. So there's no audio that I can put in here necessarily. Could I put MIDI in here? I could put notes that I triggered. I think in a way, once you have data in here, maybe you would think about, hey, you know what? I played these series of notes. I played that sort of da da thing, that sharp that thing that I did. I want to use that. That's sort of a verse, right? And I want to take the MIDI data and copy it into clips so that I can play with how things trigger. But I think inherently, but I don't think you'd have to necessarily start from clips. I think clips would be a result of taking the data and then doing something further with it. Just be creative and try things. Here's an example that's different. Let's go to the last example. This example is orchestral. And I had fun with this one too. Let me actually switch over. Let's break it down, because this is something, again, I know all of you guys do this on some level. You're dealing with these instruments in particular. And now, but what's the One Finger Orchestra with this? Well, let's look at it. So let's stay in multi-record turned off for the time being so we can just break down each section. BBC, we all love it. Great stuff. Here it is. What are we using? Violins. Which articulation? Staccato. So we're in staccato. By the way, everybody from their family here, whether it's VLAs, violas, cellos, bass, these are all the staccato versions of those BBCs. Great. So now, what are we doing with them? Well, let's put Mr. Violin into record and let's go over here. So you can see right off the bat, what are we doing? Well, we're going to arpeggiate. We're going to arpeggiate the violins. What are we going to do in this particular case? We'll go quickly through this. Want to make sure there's plenty of time for questions. So what are we doing? Okay, so I've actually changed the duration. Not sure if it's really playing in here, but it's fine. It's not going to hurt. I've reduced it 25%. I'm doing a plus octave, and I've got the set to eighth notes, and I've got it set to down up. So what do the violins sound like? Now, let's just hold here, because this is going to make my wife talk about lazy, right? Well, now, if I play the One Finger Orchestra, it'll hold it for me, so I can put my finger back on my coffee. And by the way, let me undo that for a second. It's funny how I want it to be of that, you know how you hear it edgy? I played it too loud. Let me play it quieter. It just sounds cleaner. So what can we do with it? Well, let's start with octave, okay? Already it's like, oh, this is the opening of a Christmas concert. Hey, welcome everybody. Okay, so what are we going to do here? Let's go back to 2. 1 I think is better. Down, up. Well, let's try something else here. I see, yeah. I like that the best. It's got the repeated top note. Dee dee, pa pa, dee dee. Oh, that's kind of interesting. Changing the polyrhythm there. Up, 2 up, 2 up, 2 up, down. I like that. Okay, so we're going to keep that. We're going to unhold here so we don't all go crazy. Okay, so we're going to close that. Now, we're going to go over to the violas. So remember, these are just the generic, these are patches that we all have. We probably all have, or at least something very much like this. But we're going to animate it. We want to do a One Finger Orchestra. That's, again, I know you guys are like, I know. Okay, so what are we doing with violas? Well, first thing I did before I did anything was transpose it up a major third. I want to harmonize it, okay? I don't want to be, I'm playing a C, and I don't want the violas playing a C. I want them to play a third. We're going to create a major chord here. Could be a minor chord. Let's just stick with major. We're a happy group here. Okay, so what are we doing? Well, let's just hear it. And by the way, let's look at both. This is a simple thing that we just did transposition. But in the ARP, what do we have? We have a plus octave, didn't change the duration, but just simply quarters up. Well, let's just listen with the hold, and let's see if maybe we can improve it. This is something I like, but maybe there's a better way to do it. So I'm going to play it again, hopefully in a good level. Oh, that's nice. By the way, let me just unhold for a second. This is not action strings from Native Instruments. Now, by the way, action strings, Google it, or maybe someone puts a link in there. Action strings is that motion-oriented virtual instrument that's sample-based that will give you those animated strings. Do you want to buy it? Go for it. I have it. It's really good. I was actually thinking about showing it today. Do I need it to take the BBC stuff that doesn't have all the action strings? I don't need it. I don't need it. I can get the rhythm by itself. Now, could I play it that way? I could, but you know what? You can't, I don't think you could play it the same way. Listen to that. I mean, that's very musical. It's about as, you can't really make it more musical. So let's see. Let's try some things here. Let's try 2. I like the 1. Let's try some different things here. Let's stick with up. I think that's nice. Hold. Yeah, I mean, very little things are happening here. Let's try a different rhythm just to hear it. Now, this is where this would kind of come into play. But let's just stick with simple. The violas sound really nice. We want to keep them happy today in that section. Save. Okay, so we've got that. Moving over to Mr. Cello. We all love the cello. And what's his role today? Just a standard staccato patch that has no motion, just an everyday sound. What are we going to do with it? Well, hey, geez, go figure. You guys were jumping ahead of me. He's going to play the 5th. Somebody's got to. So he's got the 5th. Perfect. Love it. But what's he going to do rhythmically? Well, let's find out. Oh, wow, I've got him really at a low pay grade here playing half notes. All right, well, and plus 2 octaves. What does it sound like? Remember, I'm playing the same C for everybody. I'm playing the same C. Like it? So simple. Now, just for the sake of we're here and could we build some harmony into it? Yeah, let's try it. I'm going to Option drag transpose down. And now I'm going to harmonize. So how are we going to, let's just harmonize a fifth. What does it sound like? I don't know. Well, let's actually do this. Let's put this down here. There it is. Oh, that's kind of interesting. Let me play it quieter. That's pretty neat. Now we've got a couple players, or, you know, for the cello players, they're doing double stop. I can play that. Okay, perfect. Great. That's awesome. Let's try something different. How about we try a B3? Let's do kind of a major 7 interval. What does it sound like? Ooh. But now, here, so there again, like you're doing a film score, you've got this sort of like little Mickey Mouse moment where somebody's doing something cute and you got transpose. Hey, that's nice. How'd you do that? Oh, well, I mean, I could certainly play that with just playing the notes from, but I did a little bit more work. I did some harmonizing. I added some transposition, some ARP to it. Oh, cool. That's interesting. Again, just try different weird stuff. It's fun. Okay, so I don't know if we were going to keep this. I kind of like the G. What if we try the third? Let's just see. Let's just try the third. What the heck? We're here. Oh, I kind of like that. All right, so we're going to leave that for now. And maybe we'll undo it. Maybe we'll bypass it. And let's hear what the bottom end is doing here. So for all the bass players, it's like, okay, so we've got the upright. What are we using? Now, I broke the rules from my own rules, and I said, I'm going to go pits and not stock. I want it to be plucked. I want it to be sort of more of an upright kind of thing. What are we doing to it? Now, I had to transpose it down because I'm playing C3. It's above the range. So first and foremost, this is just utility. This is just bring me down an octave. Oh, I like that. So what's he doing? He's not breaking too much of a sweat. By the way, you're probably thinking, God, that sounds like eighth notes. No, because we're at a fast tempo. We're at 145, so that really is a quarter note at 145. Do we want to add anything to it? Do we want to add an octave? We can just listen to it. Why not? Oh, it's the range. Yeah, I'm going to stay in the range. All right, so now we're going to one finger this out. How do we do it? Well, you guys know that I have to be in MultiRecord. So let's do it. Studio. And let's go into MultiRecord. And let's just start with the low end guys here. Let's just hear the two together. Now that I've kind of harmonized this, I'm not still 100% sure I'm going to keep it, but I'll put this up here where I can think about bypassing it. So I'm just going to play these two guys. Let's bypass that. Well, I guess once we hear the viola in there, maybe we'll come back to this. They're going to add, so now we've got the 3 parts playing C again, being kind of careful about dynamics. Let's add the third. Oops, play it quieter. So for now, we're going to leave that out because it's kind of adding sort of that, it's adding something I'm not sure I want to have in the chord tone. So we're going to bypass that. It was an interesting idea. Maybe we would keep it, you know, in a different section, you know, maybe. And by the way, well, let's add the third here. So here's all 3. Let's hear it. Here, let's do this for those who are, let's go into transpose. Let's make this an E flat just because, you know, we have the technology. It's like a little chasing, like, where's he? Oh, he's going to get there. Ah!
I think I heard that exact score in a Harry Potter movie.
Seriously, that's the John Williams effect. No, I'm just kidding. But that's the idea, right? We're changing the tempo, we're animating things, we're adding some art plugins, we're adding some pattern. We didn't add any pattern gate to that either. But a one finger orchestra, right? And with just totally sounds that don't have any sort of ambience or electronic or patterny things built into it, right? So it's just fun. That's your homework assignment. I'm just teasing. Yes, I want you guys to play with that, and I want you to send it to me on Monday. Questions about that?
Your one finger kung fu is very strong. If you have 2 minutes, can you do a beginner's guide to Megasynth using an audio input as an input trigger? It falls quite nicely with the one finger concept.
Megasynth is its own audio filter plugin, but because it has LFOs and things that you can do with a ton of animation. So that's what I ended up using it on one of the examples to add a little, that's sub-octave. I can't remember if I did it on this, but it doesn't really matter because, this is where we had, okay. So let's just get rid of some of these guys. It's a super generic, super generic. We're going to come in here, we're going to right click, and I was playing with it earlier, so it will show in the recents. And we'll go into Megasynth. So in Megasynth, remember you have basically these various inputs. And what's interesting, think of these as sort of like synth inputs, whether they are square waves, whether they are sub-octave inputs, whether they are an additional octave. So the idea is, look, you have to have an input, right? Think of this as a wiring diagram. It's not unlike other synths where you literally have to kind of think in terms of the wiring, quote unquote. The input's feeding, it's going to go all the way to the output. Oh, that's simple. That works, right? But do I want to actually feed it into a filter? Do I want to feed it into multiple filters? Do I want to take these filters and modulate those filters? Can I do that? Yeah, sure. I mean, I can assign, basically, these are ways to actually, modulate these filters. What I want to modulate it with. And so here's the idea. Let's go down into something like sub-octave. Let's hear it. So, and that's adding a little crud to it. So I'm not sure. Let's try simple tremolo. So there's some motion. I could have certainly added this today as something. And what are we doing here? Just a simple input, right? It's going all the way to the output, but we do have a modulation here. What's LFO1? Let's go over and take a look. Oh, it's simple. It's just an eighth note that's modulated. It's full modulation of a sine wave modulating the input gain. Oh, that's simple. Let's hear it. So there's bleeding it. Remember, just a little bit. There's extreme. So now, do I want to put a filter on here? Well, I could. I can feed this into a filter. Now, what are we going to actually do with it? Do we want to make an envelope? Do we want to have a pattern? We can do a pattern. Let's see, an envelope. Well, what are we going to do? Let's see here, an envelope. And let's actually, we also have to actually tie this to the output. So let's do that. There's the filter. Let me open the filter. It's actually kind of cool. So that's what Megasynth is all about, is deciding which path are you going to actually use as an input path. Sub-octave, input, octave, a combination of these. Are you going to go straight to the output? Are you going to modulate with a filter? Are you going to change and amplify the signal? And again, that's just sort of a very quick dive into Megasynth, but it's fun. It is actually a cool plugin. It's got a lot of power to it. So play with it. We'll just wrap.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Matt. That was great today.
Fantastic. Thanks everybody for being here, and have a wonderful weekend.